presenting sponsor of Rates and Barrels is Topps.com and Topps Project 70. Topps is celebrating the 70th anniversary of its very first baseball card design with a new program that pushes boundaries while paying homage to the company's heritage. Project 70 has brought together creators of all kinds for this extraordinary set. Graphic designers, tattoo and graffiti artists, animators, illustrators, painters, and even a jeweler make up the artist roster, which includes names like Snoop Dogg, Action Bronson, Ben Baller, Brittany Palmer, Jeff Staple, Tyson Beck, Alex Pardee, and more. Each artist will select their own MLB players and Topps designs from any year to craft a unique story. Ever want to know what Chris Bryant would look like in a Giants uniform and in a 1977 Topps design? Or how about Mookie Betts in another classic template from the 1970s? Now you can. 3 new cards launch daily all year long on Topps.com and are only available for 70 hours before they're gone for good. And while you're there, be on the lookout for special cards. Head to Topps.com to learn more about Project 70 and to check out which cards are live right now. Welcome to Rates and Barrels, presented by Topps. Check out Topps Project 70, celebrating 70 years of Topps baseball cards. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. It is Wednesday, August 11th. On this episode, we have some follow-up questions from our topic on Monday. One of our first topics was looking at the value of hard hit balls, particularly hard hit balls. We'll get to some of those follow-up questions on this episode and talk about balancing the barrel rates of players with their plate discipline skills, because at a certain point, yes, you can barrel the ball a lot, but if you strike out too much, it is still problematic. It is a skills flaw that offsets the great skill that you show by barreling the ball as often as you do. We're also going to get into a few late season additions with potentially bright futures, and we'll talk about when you can buy a turnaround with Stuff Plus numbers. A couple players caught my eye recently, so I want to pick Eno's brain on what some of the changes we've seen from those players might mean going forward. But, let's get right after it here. The camping chair tip that I shared on Monday, it's beginning to backfire now that it's Wednesday. Apparently, the human body is not meant to sit in a camping chair all day long and do work. It is meant to sit in a camping chair for a little while, and go to the beach and drink beer, and then come back and sit by the fire. So we'll keep things rolling just for the sake of my long-term health.
Your spine.
Yeah, I think my spine would benefit from a tight 55-minute show today as opposed to a 90-minute longer marathon show. We had a question come in about Jake Berger in particular, and I think this sort of fits into something that a lot of people are thinking about anyway. The question came from Frank on Twitter, and he writes, small sample, but Jake Berger in 23 batted ball events has an average exit velocity of 98 miles per hour, which is number 1 for non-pitchers. He also has a 4.3% soft contact rate per Fangraphs batted ball data, which is second only behind Andy Young if you lower that to a minimum of 40 qualified events. Too small a sample to do anything with, or because those events have happened, does it show potential even within a small sample frame? Try to touch on what Eno was saying, where one batted ball event can make a difference, and see if this falls in line with what was being talked about on Monday.
Yeah, first of all, a little small mea culpa. I may have described the Baseball Info Solutions hard hit incorrectly. There's actually an algorithm that converts hang time and landing distance into a hard hit percentage. So it's just a slightly different way of doing things than StatCast, but it is regimented, and it is not necessarily just a stringer making the decision. So I think that's an important thing to say, because there are stringer decisions about they do have these distinctions like fliner, liner, fly, whatever, fly. And those are very difficult, and I wonder how useful they are. And especially now that we can be more specific. But it is interesting to think that you might get a different outcome just by looking at where it landed and how long it took to get there, as opposed to looking at the launch angle and the exit velocity, which is you'd think you'd get to the same result kind of doing those two things. So I'm a little surprised they're so different. But then there's also just the question of what the threshold is, what you call hard hit after that. So didn't get it completely right. Sorry about that to BIS. They do great work. And then on top of that, just back to Mr. Berger. I mean, I would look at the max exit velocity in this sort of sample and be pretty excited. He's got a 115 on the board. And the average exit velocity has just not been shown to be a useful stat. And I don't know why that is. I think that people just go in and out a little bit with the average exit velocity. I think that's a little bit of like a hot streak sort of deal, where remember when when Cespedes came over and was hitting 95 plus for like 3 months.
Yeah.
And if you could average 95 all the time, you'd have really great outcomes. But he didn't come into the next year and just average 95. Like it was just, it ended up being just a hot few months. But here I'm trying to get the exit velocity sorted here. So Jake Berger has a 115 at a 22-degree launch angle. That is, according to the research of Glenn Healy, very predictive. And no matter what that launch angle is, 115 is really impressive. But not on top of that, he has a 112, and he has already 5 batted balls over that 108 threshold, of which all of them are in the predictive range according to Glenn Healy's work. So this is a guy who hits the ball hard. And for what it's worth, I don't know that his plate discipline is so terrible.
Right. I think this is kind of another question that came in from Travis separately. He was asking if we could address how to handle batted ball stats with traditional play discipline stats. You're going to kind of marry the two together. The example is maybe a player has a high barrel rate but high strikeout rates. And how do you work through that? Well, I think it really depends a lot on the context of who the player is, how old the player is, how much experience the player has at the big league level. And I would say that Jake Berger would be one of the more extreme examples of a guy that, because of injuries and because of the lost 2020 minor league season, he has lost a ton of development time. The last time Jake Berger had played in a professional game before his AAA debut in 2021 was A-ball in 2017. So there's a 3-year gap where he was rehabbing and not playing in competitive game settings. So if you look at Berger and say, well, he's striking out 35% of the time, okay, first off, small sample, 42 plate appearances, so not necessarily a skill that we'd say he absolutely has shown us that he does not have, the ability to make contact. He was at 25.3% at AAA. Even that, you'd look at that and say, that still might not be a great indicator of who he is given that layoff. So this is a particularly challenging question, but just how much would you say you need to see from Berger before you could start to feel good about even forecasting his K rate? I mean, he's not going to be a low K percentage guy, but I don't think he's going to be necessarily an outlier in a bad way based on what we've seen so far.
Yeah, there's a fairly wide spread in the projections. You can see that the bat has him around 26%, and Steamer has him at 32%. That's pretty wide because 26 is closer to league average. 32 is someone who would have a poor batting average. And yet, amazingly, Steamer has him projected for a 239 batting average, and so does the bat. How does that happen? It happens because of power. I do feel comfortable saying he has good power. I'm a little surprised the bat has projected him for less power than Steamer, but I think that we can comfortably say he has power. And and the strikeout rate is really interesting. And I think it comes back to, there's a philosophical question here, like missed time like that. What is his baseball age? You know what I mean?
Yes. Is he really just like 22 in terms of baseball? Because he was 21 the last time he was playing professionally. Does he lose an extra year and a half because his body aged? I mean, like there is a clear difference. And we talk about this with players who are multi-sport athletes further into their professional career or deep into college. And you say, okay, now this guy's focusing full-time on baseball. or now this guy is a pitcher full time. The Jacob deGrom example, right? He was a college shortstop early in his career, started pitching late, had Tommy John surgery. Like, he's not as old as the age on the back of his baseball card would suggest. There's not as much mileage on his body as a pitcher. I would say the same is mostly true of Berger. It just kind of depends on the nature of those injuries and how much wear and tear long term is kind of done as a result of the time missed. So I wouldn't look at him and say he's on the same level as a typical 25-year-old right now. I would say split the difference. He's probably more like a 23-year-old in terms of his baseball age right now. And then if you think of him that way, what he's done in that very limited sample, and even what he did at AAA before he got promoted, is a bit more impressive.
Yeah, there was that result, that aging curve of hitters that went off to war and came back and missed 2 years that aged more than the players who played. But that's a complicated one because they went off and were in war.
Yeah, maybe the impacts of war
might have been injured in war, and we're definitely not like hitting off of the slider machine for a year.
No. The long-term psychological toll of fighting in a war.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it.
Probably impact you in your ability to hit baseballs or throw baseballs the way you did prior to going to war.
Yeah, so I don't know how useful that is, but yeah, with the Lorenzo Cain thing about coming to baseball late and then having a later peak, I don't think we've fully digested that or proven it with other examples. I mean, there's just a couple guys that peaked late that got to baseball late, and we're kind of like, oh, maybe that's a thing. I don't think the sample's that big because most of the baseball players that play in baseball have been playing since they were like 6 years old, so it's kind of hard to find the more Lorenzo Cains to compare him to. But and then you have a guy who physically was having trouble, right? To take 2 years off. The body is now 2 years old. But then you think of also, God, it's one of those things where you're just like thinking so many different directions. But like Buster Posey. Buster Posey is old, but took a year off and now looks so much better physically. He just hit a homer. He hit a tank to deep center in San Francisco last night. And he's going to hit, 20 or so homers this year. It's going to be one of his best power outputs ever after a year off. So I would just say that I think his strikeout rate will come down. I think it won't ever be a total asset, but that he's a guy who can hit 250 with power, and the power looks really real. So that's sort of how I'd assess him. And I think by doing that, I'd mostly be looking at the max exit velo with a little bit of an eye for which angles those max exit velos came in.
Yeah, and I think there are other players that are similar, just in the sense that they maybe haven't played a lot in the big leagues yet, but they're showing some flashes. They maybe do have either plate discipline that could improve or good enough plate discipline with a really good barrel rate that it should get us excited about the future. But if you take a custom leaderboard and you start looking at guys who thrive in barrel rate but struggle in K rate, you don't have to go very far. If you just sort by barrels per batted ball event, Mike Zunino, who leads all players with at least 100 plate appearances this season at 25.8%, he has struck out 37.8% of the time, right? And it's kind of like, well, is that good? It's like, well, he probably wouldn't get to that much power without swinging and missing as much as he does. So you have to take the good with the bad in a profile like that. But
if you're talking offensive value, like, yes, it's great that he can hit the ball really hard and that he takes some walks, but at a 40% K rate, he's tanking his offensive value in real life baseball and in fantasy baseball. And so you can't just say sort for barrels and be like, Mike Zunino is going to be my catcher next year. I mean, I did a 50 plate appearance minimum. Andy Young, the second baseman for the Diamondbacks, hits the ball really hard, has a 116 max EV, 28% barrel rate, huzzah, 49% strikeout rate. And I think the one category I wanted to throw in there, 27 years old. So him and Zunino, not very likely, at least according to aging curves, Zunino is actually likely to strike out more in the future. And Andy Young is past the peak in terms of improving your strikeout right now. He might improve it just because he gets more time in the big league. So maybe he can do a little better going forward. But I don't think that I would anoint him a sleeper just based on the barrel rate.
Right. I think we would be looking for guys who are probably closer to 24 or 25. Younger, obviously better, but a lot of players right now are not getting that opportunity at the big league level if they're younger than that age, or if they are, they're highly regarded prospects who don't have the extreme swing and miss issues. Some of the other names that kind of stand out, I mean, great players are on the barrel rate leaderboard, of course. Ohtani, Tatis, Buxton, Acuna, Aristides Aquino. I think he's kind of more in the ship has probably already sailed group, 36.8% K rate so far this season. We've seen a lot of swing and miss from him, even when it was running real hot 2 years ago at the end of the season for the Reds. It's almost like there's a cutoff somewhere around 32%, which, again, this would take a more rigorous study to say this is where the line is, but just kind of looking and eyeballing this list of guys who barrel the ball really well, guys who strike out a lot but not too much and are still productive, that's where it seems to be. Franmil Reyes is like right at that line. He's 7th in barrel rate, 31.9% K rate. It just barely works. Even Mike
Tyler
Trout,
O'Neill, Brandon Belt, Mike Trout.
Trout's surprisingly high up there, 28.1% K rate, but top 10 in terms of the barrel rate. You see some guys on the fail side like Bobby Bradley, right? 35.6% K rate. It's probably not coming down at this point. So you're not necessarily looking at him as a sleeper.
But I feel a little better about him. I mean, like, if you maybe Bradley and Delbeck, we were about to sort of put them away because they're 25 and 26. They strike out so much, 36%, 38%. But at least they're 25 and 26. You know what I mean? Like, there is a little bit of a chance there, and at least they hit the ball really hard. So I'm not saying that I would focus on getting Bradley or Dahlbeck in Dynasty or trying to acquire them. But if there was a stash situation where I could put them on the back end of my bench, or a throw-in situation in a trade where you're trying to get somebody else, it is interesting because some people will think that Dahlbeck is the future, right? Some people still like him a lot.
Yeah.
But at 26, I think mostly in your dynasty leagues, at 26 for him and 25 for Bradley, there are some people ready to jump ship. And I'm willing to take a share if you're jumping ship.
Yeah, but I think in those leagues, we're talking 20-plus team leagues, like Dynasty Keeper, really deep leagues with nobody on the wire, or AL-only leagues.
Yeah, right? It's hard. It's like in my 12-teamer, I'm gonna put one of these guys on my bench in a 12-teamer. I don't know. I need that spot to play.
Yeah, I saw. I mean, a couple other names that I wouldn't be that excited about. Patrick Wisdom. I know he's put up some good numbers so far, but 38% K rate. Age isn't there. If you are looking for some younger guys who are somewhat interesting, I think Ryan Jeffers kind of caught our eye. He's a catcher, so they take a little longer anyway, but the barrel rate's good, 34.6% K rate so far. And we don't have a long track record of elevated swing and miss from him in the minors, at least not at an alarming rate. So I could see Jeffers kind of emerging to be a good long-term sort of pickup. He's at the point in his career, he's probably not going to spend a lot more time in the minors. He's at least in some kind of share with Mitch Garver when they're both healthy, and perhaps the Twins end up making Jeffers the starter going into next season. So I think he'd be among the players that I'd be pretty interested in, who probably have a brighter future with plate discipline and already are showing the ability to barrel the ball consistently.
Yeah, Jeffers is to me like a really interesting. I think I even did it this year, but I think I'd do it again, where he's a really interesting guy to put $1 or $2 on in a 2-catcher AL only, because Garver could get hurt, and also he could just play well in limited sample, in a 200 or 300 plate appearance type season, or one of them get shipped out and he could go into the role. But like, he seems like a Garver clone, actually. I mean, I don't know if that's true, like in every regards of like their minute strengths and weaknesses. Cause I know Garver has had some issues with, fastball, slider, like which I forget which one it is he couldn't hit, but he couldn't hit one of them. But I do think that Jeffers could do what Garver does. And so the Minnesota Twins might say, hey, we've got a guy who can do what Garver does. Why don't we just, give Garver to someone? for pitching. That could be totally something that happens. But in any case, he's the guy that I put my eye on. And then the other one Kyle Lewis also stands out on this list for me. He doesn't have the 35% strikeout rate where you're worried about him, but at a 25% strikeout rate with this kind of a top 50 barrel rate, and then 25 years old, there is another level for him. And that level would be, a 23, 22% strikeout rate, and really tapping into all that power. So that was a name I wanted to highlight. And then old friend of the program, Keston Hiura, just wanted to point out, great barrel rate, 24 years old.
I didn't bring him up. I want to believe, and I think in the several times that Keston Hiura has been described on this pod and on the Athletic Baseball Show, I think the consensus between all of us who've talked about him is he needs an offseason to revamp his swing. Period. Like, you're not fixing that swing in a season.
Yeah.
It gets rebuilt over an entire winter, and hopefully he comes back and just makes more contact and still has the power. I think it's all Fields' power. It always has been. It's still there, 51st in barrel rate, so I get it, and the age is the key there too. The other thing that Lewis does, by the way, and Jeffers does this too, that is really important, he walks. It matters for real-life outcomes. It matters for overall value. Getting on base gives you a chance to score a run in fantasy. There's plenty of reason to still look at that column as well. So if you're going to go after someone who barrels the ball and needs to grow a bit in the K rate percentage, find the guy that actually shows the ability to draw some walks too. Because I think, at least in my mind, even if the numbers don't bear it out, it gives me that glimmer of hope that there's some pitch recognition in there. And with that, there's that possibility of cutting down a little bit on the K rate over time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to put those guys up against Brent Rooker, who clicks a lot of these boxes, 26 years old, 30% strikeout rate, top 75 barrel rate, 5% walk rate.
I just have a random comp that just came to mind, because a 5% walk rate is also what Adolis Garcia has right now, too.
Oh, there you go. Without the speed or the defense.
Well, yeah, without his last 6 weeks have been pretty brutal. But
the speed and the defense have kept him out there.
Yeah, he keeps playing. Is Adolis Garcia actually another Adam Duvall? I mean, the current version of Duvall strikes out about the same, walks at a similar rate, barrels the ball at a similar rate. I mean, is that sort of the trajectory of Garcia?
Question is, if Adam Duvall could run and play center field defense, would he be a good player?
Yeah, that's a fair question to ask too. But I just think about Duvall as a guy that's been on and off several rosters and has had a pretty bumpy path to the player that he's been really just throughout his career. But even the last couple of years, when he's had some short-term value for us in Miami and Atlanta, it's come with some, and he could lose his job at any moment sort of downside risk.
Yeah, I've mostly been a proponent of letting him go, trading him if you need to, especially if you need pieces and you're a win now team. It seems like he could get something for you and might not cost you that much long term.
It's weird. This turned up a couple catchers, like Luis Torrens, another guy.
I was just about to say, William Contreras and Luis Torrens both show up as having good plate discipline, being young, having good barrels. Why are we showing up catchers? And why aren't we showing up more fun names? I mean, Kyle Lewis is fun. That was fun. And then I guess Jeffers and the catchers are somewhat fun, but is there somebody here that Chas McCormick or
could be a little fun? Maybe Sheldon, that's part of why they were willing to move Miles Straw. Noisy, I think,
not walking time at all though.
Yeah, Noisy was in a better situation before the Dodgers traded for him. He was in a better path in Oakland to possibly get playing time because of the problems they had at second base. He gets traded to a depth chart and is an up and down guy all season. Connor Joe is a little too old to be interesting. How about Ramon Urias in Baltimore?
Yes,
years in Mexico and
also kind of boring, but but interesting. He's one of these. nobody is excited to do it, but then gets great value from them, right?
So I think
27
looking
years
for
old, could strike out a little bit less given his minor league career. So 23% strikeout rate, top 100 barrel rate or top 75 barrel rate. So and then applies his trade in Baltimore. Walks a little bit. Probably won't steal any bases, but my comp was Freddie Galvis, I think. I'm gonna look at Galvis here. I'm talking about the Freddie Galvis that struck out. Let me see if he struck out too much to make this comp worthwhile. But no, yeah, Freddie Galvis struck out 20 to 22% of the time, and over a 4-year stretch, averaged something like 20 homers a year. Boom. Although he did steal some bases, I'm not sure Urias will, but something like Freddie Galvis, I could see.
Has to be in the right situation.
I have some auto new. I have like $1 on an auction right now for Freddie Galvis and auto new, just because middle infielders are hard to find, and a guy who could do what he can do could probably be worth that $1.
Flipping the leaderboard just for a moment, and we're not talking about under the radar, overlooked sorts of guys at this point, but I think when I see Josh Donaldson high on the barrel rate list, low in terms of K rate, high in terms of walk rate, even though he's old and he's hurt all the time, as that price continues to fall, he's the old and boring type of player that I'll still keep taking chances on, even knowing that there's obviously a risk of more missed time in the future because of past missed time and soft tissue problems that he's been dealing with. But then there's also Matt Olson. And I thought when the first time I saw that his K rate had significantly improved, probably back in May, I said, let's see what happens in June and July and August, because I'm not sure I'm going to buy into this completely new version of Olson. But we're sitting here in the second week of August. He's got a 16% K rate, a 12.1% walk rate, and he's still barreling the ball a lot, still top 50 in barrel rate on this board. So how willing are you to say that Matt Olson has changed himself for the long term better with some of the changes that we've seen from him in 2021?
There's some coaching aspect behind the scenes. He's choking up on the bat more. He's varying his distance from the plate more often, and sort of changing that with regard to the pitcher's heat map to kind of take advantage of where his swing lines up with their heat maps. He's got a little something called a little red machine that he got from Tommy La Stella. That I think is some sort of slider throwing pitching machine. I don't know. He also told me that he's trying to chop down on the ball a little bit, which doesn't sound great, but is maybe a good idea. He kind of has the Cody Bellinger natural loft to his swing. And by focusing on chopping down to the ball, he's being quicker to the ball and sort of mitigating that natural loft a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's honestly that's kind of like a golf tip that is pretty common. You have to kind of chop down the ball to actually get the ball in the air more consistently, which is so counterintuitive. A golf club obviously angled and different than a baseball bat, but if you have a loopy swing, I think it's a fair way to describe Bellinger and probably Matt Olson's old swing. Yeah. If you in your mind are chopping down, your mechanics are not just chopping straight down. You're not going to just top the ball and hit worm burners, but you're going to
tighten it up a little bit.
You're going to be closer to level, and you're not trying to get to completely level, but you're just trying to be less loopy than you were before, and that's sort of the corrective action you have to take to get there. So I like that that's the adjustment he made given the problems we'd seen for him in the past.
I mean, I think it's likely this is a career year, but the nice thing about having projections in front of you is that you can look at them and say, what happens if he just what if I buy at this level? What happens if I just get the projections? It's still pretty damn good. I mean, the projections right now would settle in around 260 with honestly like a 38 to 40 homer season.
Right. Every projection system right now for the rest of the season on Matt Olson has a lower K rate than what he gave us in 2017, 2018, or 2019.
For his career. Yeah, Zips is the only one that's over his career number.
Yeah. So that's a pretty significant improvement when you see that across the board with projections. Anything else in this corner that has caught your eye?
And you were talking sort of about the old and boring. I mean, I think JD Davis might have another gear to him because the plate discipline is good. He missed so much time. The strikeout rate is a little bit out of line for him. He's 28. I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things where he gets traded. He was in trade talks, or at least he was in trade rumors for the Mets. You know, they're always looking for better defensive fits and they're always moving pieces around. Or maybe he's just a Met at third base for all of next year and actually plays a full season. So JD Davis is definitely a name that keeps popping when you do these kinds of searches. And then we talk about old friend Sam Hilliard. Has decent walk rate. The strikeout rate at 35% is not super manageable, but at 27, if he could get it down to, 31%, he might be in that sort of Tyler O'Neill territory.
Yeah.
And he's a little bit like Tyler O'Neill, right? Where he's a guy who's like prodigious tools, fast, hits the ball really hard, has problem making contact, and hasn't had a regular job yet.
Right. I would say you could put him maybe into the actual age conversation where, from a baseball perspective, maybe he's 6 months or a year actually younger than the true age just because of the way they've jerked around the playing time with him. I thought he'd play more by now. Nothing's guaranteed in Colorado. We don't have to go down that road again, but I'm not writing him off completely for deeper leagues, even though
it seems like it'll get more like it's more likely now, given the last year, that he gets a full season to a burn, because the scouting director who signed him, I mean, who drafted him, is now the GM.
Good point.
And the group that they left behind, like the GM and everybody that wanted to win now, obviously we're trying to make win now decisions, and we're bringing in all these old guys that kept Sam Hilliard out of jobs. They're all gone, or at least that idea is gone. I was just talking to Brett Phillips today, and he's 27, and I'm not saying he's performing amazingly, but with league average offense, and I think some of the best defense in the game, some of the best base running in the game, he's going to end up somewhere around a league average player. And in less time. I mean, in like something like 400 plate appearances, he might get 2 wins. And one of the things he just said was like, one of the things they did here was believe in me and give me a shot to be in the lineup in a regular way. And he's got the best barrel rate of his career right now. And he's improved, in a lot of aspects of the game. So I'm not saying pick up Brett Phillips. I'm saying Sam Hilliard has that chance that at some point someone says, hey, we're going to give you this shot.
Yeah, I think the interesting name that popped into my head, or once interesting name, Sam Fuld. I mean, the Rays had gotten a lot of mileage out of Sam Fuld back in the day. I wonder if that's kind of how they saw it.
I bet you that's the Brett Phillips mold. Yeah. I did ask somebody over there. I was like, I was a little surprised. Like, what, Brett Phillips? And he's like, it's the whole package, And in terms of like, fan interaction, which is why I was talking to him, but teammate interaction, and then just like kind of peak fourth outfielder skills, right? Like, what do you want from your fourth outfielder other than like excellent defense, bats from the left side, and can take a walk and hit a homer, right?
Yeah, cannon arm.
Yeah, I mean that's it's not someone that you pick up expecting to turn into your starting center fielder. It's someone you pick up expecting to be a really, really great fourth outfielder.
And you have that player on your roster as long as you need him. If your team gets better because you called up a few young guys eventually, then you trade them away because someone else will find plenty of value in that skill set too. So yeah, a better real life player than a fantasy player. And obviously the clubhouse presence matters too. If you've ever watched a Rays game, it's not always easy to see who the good clubhouse guys are when we're watching on TV. You could see that Brett Phillips is a good clubhouse guy from miles away.
And one thing I talk about too is that I think one of the major skills of being a good clubhouse guy is the ability to cross cultural and language gaps. And do you remember that one clip of them doing a dance off?
I do.
Wasn't it Brett Phillips against Randy Arozarena?
Yeah, after was it one of the World Series games, or after they won the ALCS, I think is when they had I think they had more than one dance off, but yes, I do remember that.
That's primo clubhouse chemistry right there. I mean, those are guys across a language barrier. Like, those are guys that hung out in different crews after the game. You know what I mean? To do something like that really builds camaraderie across the clubhouse. So, and I hope that if anybody cares about that sort of thing, I've got a piece going up next week, and it's going to be an A1 about it's about fan interaction, but the Phillips quotes I might be the deepest in there. Like, I didn't quite expect that. I thought I was going to go to Phillips and get just a couple funny stories, because that's I've interacted with him since the Arizona Fall League, and we always end up laughing while we're talking. But he really brought it this time with some really interesting things. And then a little factoid: you said people like that are always in demand. He had a really interesting, I don't want to give it all away, but he said that there was another trade offer on the table. The Rays were not the only team that wanted him, literally, when he went. And I think to some people that might be surprising for a guy that was hitting like 150 at the time with the Royals at the time. And the Royals seemed to be like a team that would need anybody that was going to that could maybe be good,
Yeah, strange decision there, but maybe they're looking at something. Maybe
that's what we're talking about. Well, yeah, right, exactly. Like he's probably like a really good fourth outfielder. We don't really need a really good fourth outfielder right now. We need a starting outfielder.
Yeah, we need to find a guy that could be a starter if the right development happens. Like, we think he's a good role guy, but a role guy doesn't help you when you're rebuilding.
I think that explains some of the Edward Olivares thing. I know people are really mad about this. Have you noticed this?
People are really mad about it. And
background is Edward Olivares. People like him because his projections are okay. He's got power and speed. 25. The Royals seem to need an outfielder. If you just plugged him in, you could probably get. If you plugged him in for a full season, you could probably get something like 250, 18 and 10 or something. And that's the kind of that's a fantasy profile that could be very useful in a lot of leagues.
Yeah, I mean, he's destroyed Omaha in 52 games at AAA this year. He's got 13 homers, 12 steals. He's got a sub 20% K rate. He's got a 155 WRC plus. It's a 322, 395, 572 slash line. So it's kind of
the Royals refuse to give him a job.
It's weird. And then you look at the big league results, and there's a big difference. But it takes time, right? If he has nothing left to prove in the upper levels of the minor leagues, like, you are the Royals, you are in a position to look at the future. He looks like he should be at least some part of your future. So I think that's why people are frustrated, but it's a results-based game a lot of times. 283 OBP so far this year. Even if you're giving power, that's not really enough to stick in the lineup. So it's weird that he's in this spot in Kansas City. I would expect this more if he were on a roster where there was a team that still had a chance to make the playoffs, and they couldn't afford to give him a lot of playing time, so they wanted to play a lot more at AAA because this is his first season at the AAA level. It's not like he destroyed AAA 2 years ago pre-pandemic and is doing it again now, right? So I understand the frustration. Right now,
it's like Nicky Lopez is getting playing time.
Yeah.
Instead of him.
I think Olivares is more interesting than Nicky Lopez, but hey, that's just me. Thanks a lot for that question, Travis. That definitely did a lot of heavy lifting for today's rundown.
Yes, thank you for helping us out with the show. My children are home from school for the last 3 days, and Derek is living in a closet.
I am, with camping furniture and a very upset dog. If you saw us on YouTube at the beginning of the show, you could see in the reflection Hazel was not having the back-to-back shows on Wednesday. She's looking outside. She goes, "Hey, it's 75 and sunny outside. We're not playing, and you're just sitting there staring at your computer like an idiot."
The dog's gotta love the move to California, though.
She overall does, yeah. It's just a matter of us being freed up to spend more time with her outside. We'll get there as soon as things get settled in. I wanted to talk to you about some players that could be good late-season additions with bright futures. We really drove this point home on the Athletic Fantasy Baseball podcast. That episode will go up today as well. But this is a time of year, and it does not matter what type of league you play in. you need to continue hustling on the wire. It's a redraft league. There are still opportunities to get extra standings points, to close the gap, to protect a lead. If you're in a keeper league or a dynasty league, I think this is one of the absolute best times of the year to start improving your roster just with simple waiver wire pickups. And one guy that Ian brought up, who I have not seen this season, but I do remember seeing him as a reliever late last year, Carlos Hernandez. I think you wrote about him last week while I was traveling. By the eye test, this is where Ian goes by eye test before numbers. He's like, this guy looks amazing. I looked at the Stuff Plus numbers. Those look amazing too. And it got me wondering, like, what if he's just better than Jackson Kowar and Daniel Lynch? Doesn't mean those guys aren't good also. But I just wonder if Hernandez was kind of in this perfect situation to be completely overshadowed by the better pedigree guys in the organization when we're looking at Stuff Plus numbers that show multiple pitches that are above average with command too.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with him, and I would just one note of caution, because I am totally in the tank for Carlos Hernandez. Just the command isn't great, and so that's, I think, very hard to see when you're watching, because you see him hit 99 in the seventh inning, and you're like, "Whoa, that's easy to see." But if you look at the location plus, for example, on a slider, it's 90. The location plus on his four-seam fastball is 90. His overall location plus is 96, is below average. And that does undo some of the good that is done by his stuff. But I love the park. I love the stuff. Curveball, slider, changeup, and sinker all above average. Even the four-seam is basically right at average. And I am a big fan. One of the reasons that the command may even improve, I think, going forward, is that he was kind of rushed. If you look at his history, he didn't have a lot of innings. He's been in the system since 2017 or before. When did they sign him?
Yeah, his first rookie ball season was 2017.
Yeah, forget. I don't see where. I'll see where they signed him, but he didn't have a lot of innings down there. But he did run into a bit of, as I understand it, a bit of a kind of a 40-man roster crunch, where he was getting somehow to the end of his time being protected, and so they had to decide what to do with him. And that's kind of the reason why he's in the big leagues, where maybe his command could take a benefit from more time in the minor leagues, but they weren't allowed. They basically ran out of time to do that. I don't know if there's maybe some injury in there, because there's not a lot of innings. But I'm all over him. I've got him wherever I can get him.
And I think the command for me, it's not problematic in the below average way. It's not in the 80s, right? When we see guys in the 80s, we look and go, oh, that's probably a reliever for sure. I think with Hernandez, it's a little bit like we were talking about with some of the barrel rate guys with some decent underlying plate skills. It's just good enough, and he's just young enough where you can say maybe there is that path there. And the lack of innings, I mean, that's true for so many pitchers coming off the season we just had. But yeah, the shape of his minor league career is pretty unusual. So with all those weapons, I think there's actually a better chance than not that he's going to be a quality starter in Kansas City.
I think it's also, I think it's really interesting that you bring up the number of weapons. So Carlos Hernandez has 91 overall command plus. Luis Patino has a 91 overall command plus. So that's, you might say, oh, here are two high stuff, low command, right there at the cusp. 90 is often what I call the reliever shelf. It does matter if you have more pitches. It does matter, because I think maybe on any given day, you might have better command of one, and then you have more chances of having a pitch you can command better than the others. The distribution of the command, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a difference between a guy who can command two pitches 91 at a 91 level, right? Or a guy who has five pitches, some of which are 100, 102, 104, and then some which are like 80 and 70, right? It's just a totally different thing. So with Patino, the pressure is to command the only pitches you're throwing. Whereas with Hernandez, it's like, well, what can I command today? And what can I get away with in these counts and those counts? So I'm not saying that Carlos Hernandez is better than Luis Patino, but I would say I'm maybe a little bit more nervous about Luis Patino's 91 command plus than I am about Carlos Hernandez's 91 command plus.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to dig into here, and I think the related question I had for you is when you start to see any pitcher go through some changes in season, when are you comfortable buying a turnaround with Stuff Plus or even Location Plus? I mean, I saw Tristan McKenzie's chart recently, in part because the results were good. I think of his last 6 appearances, 5 have been average or better in terms of his Stuff Plus number, which seems pretty significant, right? Because he was pretty consistently below average in all of his starts up until about the middle of June. So do you look at McKenzie as a guy who maybe is starting to show us some of the things that I was hoping to see at least back at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, he has a definite sort of, before demotion and after demotion curve. And it's pretty trackable in velocity where he was struggling to sit 92 or so before and has kept that velo. So I noticed the velo right away when he came back, and 2 starts in, I was like ready to change his ranking and be more interested in Tristan McKenzie. But it is funny to remember back to his rookie year where he kind of had that good velo in the first 2 starts and then just basically lost it over time. And that was part of the story. But then in this one, this time, Tristan McKenzie came up and he was quoted as saying, I have to let it all air out. I have to throw as hard as I can in the zone. And that's how I'm going to be my best. And that lines up with his velo. So you're kind of like, well, we've got this quote, we've got the velo. I think that can accelerate how quickly you would believe in someone, as you kind of have a story to believe and kind of it fits some of the peripheral numbers. But we did actually do some validation for Stuff Plus, and I've been looking at it. And the big number in season when Stuff Plus starts beating in season projections is 400 pitches. So it's a bit of a concrete answer for you. Now, that would suggest that 400 pitches in, you know as much as you're going to know about the whole season, which isn't true. You gain more information over time, but also I think it does suggest that, like, if you see a big change, 3 or 4 starts is a good enough number. You see a big change in Stuff Plus. And I think, for me, I think you had on the rundown another name where the change has been pretty drastic. And it's funny because I was being taken to task, I think, in my last Q&A session. And everyone was throwing this name around as an example that Stuff Plus doesn't work. But Jameson Taillon cares not. He actually had seen his Stuff Plus diminish over time. But I think there's a fairly clear demarcation between his last 6 starts and the starts before. His very last start wasn't great by Stuff Plus, but if you just look as a group, the last 6 starts were probably his best 6 starts in the course of the season by Stuff Plus. And
that range includes his 3 best of the season too.
Yeah. So one start, there is and we're working on getting this out to the public, but if you look at these graphs or you ask me for them on Twitter, you'll see there's a variation from start to start. It's not the smoothest of lines. I think that makes sense. There's a saying, different day, different arm. You get out there and maybe the conditions are different. It's hot, it's cold, obviously hot has something to do with Luis Castillo's ups and downs. How loose you can get that day, that sort of thing. So Stuff Plus is not something that becomes a straight line really quickly. But the hope is that it tells you a lot. And from our early validation work, 400 pitches is a big number.
Yeah, the Tyon chart kind of reminds me of the scene in Billy Madison when Veronica Vaughn asks him to write a cursive Z, and he's just scribbling all over the place. That's kind of what the Tyon stuff plus number chart looks like on a start-by-start basis, but it is definitely nice to see that cluster of average or better starts together more recently. I don't know if we're ever going to see a ton of Ks from Tyon, especially in the AL, right? Look at that game log. I know he had a couple starts that popped recently, but if he ends up being a top 30 to 40 starting pitcher on a more consistent basis, I think I could buy that. Maybe he'll be a tick better than that because of the team context, the ratios stay good, but I don't want to look at this last like 2 months from him and say that's who he is now too. It's like he's both. He's the guy we saw in the first 2 months, and he's the guy we've seen over the last 2 months. But probably the better version of like the average of those two guys is the most you could hope for.
The overall line, the overall line is what you're saying. Like the overall line looks pretty good.
Yeah, nice turnaround.
3.8 ERA. He's had a history of having low whips, so 1-2 whip I think is doable. Even just a projection sense, taking away the stuff in command numbers, just looking at what he's done ever since he's had the slider, he's had double-digit swinging strike rates and strikeout rates of over 8 per 9. He's always demonstrated great command and the ability to keep the ball in the park. Now, obviously, this is the first year he's in Yankee Stadium, so his home run rate has gone up. But I think a 1.35 home run per 9 for a Yankee starter is actually pretty good. It's a really, really tough park. So I think Tyon has done just about what I expected, and is a good but not great starter.
I don't know why it's working out. We're talking mostly L players today, so my apology to those of you who listen who are in NL only leagues. But the other player that I thought was kind of interesting is Logan Gilbert, because when he came up, the stuff plus numbers I think were pretty good on at least two of his pitches that still are good now to this point in his rookie season. But he really turned things around after a bumpy first few outings. It's not to say that that's anything abnormal that was happening to him those first few times out, but as you've had a chance to look at the bigger picture with Logan Gilbert, and you see like his chart tracking up in a very good way more recently, do you think the ceiling is that of maybe a legitimate frontline sort of starter? Because that's the vibe I'm starting to get looking at some of the underlying numbers on Gilbert.
Yeah, one of the nice things is that this upward trajectory and stuff plus just tracks right with his fastball. His fastball has just been improving, and the changeup is up and down and erratic. But I think that might be the last key to unlocking the curve. He's mostly put away because he's had one start this year. It's been above average by stuff plus. It's kind of ironic because I think in a lot of scouting reports, the curve was supposed to be his best foot forward, but he's a fastball slider guy with a seam shifted wake changeup. And there's some evidence that he found a new grip or found something with that changeup halfway through his major league season so far. And so I think that is what I'd watch if I wanted to really believe in him as a frontline starter. But I think he's shown us enough in terms of being able to locate the four seam and slider. He has both of those are above average by stuff and location. So that's a really good 1-2 pitch in today's game. It's 1-2 combo. There's a lot less pressure on you if you can do those two things well. I'm trying to think of somebody that just slimmed it to that. Tyon, didn't he? No. Also, oh man, who was it that just slimmed it and just tried to be more four seam? Blake Snell. Blake Snell just not only did he turf the changeup, which never looked good by stuff plus, but in his last few starts, he has turfed the curveball and become more of a fastball slider guy. And I think just with there's less pressure on you to turn the lineup over a bunch of times. And I think that just going with your two best pitches and mixing in a third pitch to get 5 innings deep is a good enough approach for a lot of people.
And I would wonder too if you have 3 or 4 pitches that you like to use, and maybe your mechanics are out of whack. Getting down to 2 pitches might help you get those mechanics back. Like for a while, you give them up. Eventually, you get the mechanics cleaned up, and then you go back to throwing that 3rd and 4th pitch again once everything is back in sync or where you want it to be.
Yeah. So for Snell now, he's had three starts in a row with his three starts in a row of above average stuff, which he hadn't done since May. And so I would say there's a bit of a turnaround there. Also, he basically the 3 best consecutive starts of location. So I think that speaks to what you're talking about. I will say that I don't know that I'm going to put Blake Snell like in my top 20 next year. I don't know. What's your sort of off the cuff, feeling about Blake Snell? I think he's taken enough of a ding to me that I know the strikeouts are still there, but the command is inconsistent. The stuff numbers aren't amazing. I don't know. Is he a top 20 pitcher for you going into next season?
No, I expect Blake Snell's ADP when we get to next March, barring some unforeseen amazing turnaround. If he finishes the season on a crazy high note and stops walking guys, I expect him to be probably in the 150 range in terms of his NFBC ADP. And I think that usually puts you about 35th to 40th among starting pitchers, if I'm remembering correctly and counting correctly.
I might actually be interested at that price point, though, because the strikeouts have been there all the way through.
I think the thing that I'm also wondering about with Snell is, I've talked about this draft all the time. I have this team I co-manage with Todd Zola. We start drafting the last week of the regular season for the following year. The earlier you draft, if you're doing something like that, or you're doing draft champions, the earlier you go, the better the discount's probably going to be. It applies to guys who've had disappointing 2021s like Blake Snell.
Because people like us have less time to talk them up as sleepers.
Well, I think everyone has no time to find the silver linings and to find the reasons to buy in. They don't have the stories about drive
it's just
line.
Blake Snell sucks.
Right. The recency bias is stronger coming right off the season like that. But I also think for someone like Logan Gilbert, the same holds true, where all the reasons all the good things he's doing that are going to lead him into, I don't even think they're sleeper columns, but the my guys sorts of columns, I think the bold predictions columns, right? You're going to get bold predictions. Someone, somewhere. I guarantee this. Yes, the bold prediction is Logan Gilbert will finish top 3 in the AL Cy Young Award voting in 2022. That will be a bold prediction. Somebody, maybe even someone we know, actually writes and publishes. And this is not me mocking them. This is just me saying before that happens, you're going to get a better price on Logan Gilbert than you will when that sort of thought is bouncing around.
I think I would take Blake Snell over Logan Gilbert next year.
Really?
Especially if I got a round of price or whatever, If
the prices were even, I would take Gilbert. But I think Gilbert's going to have an ADP in the 75 to 100 range. I think it's going to be about a 50 pick difference early, and it's going to be like a 75 pick difference.
Give me those picks, I'll take Snell, I think.
I think it's going to be a big gap. I think Gilbert does all the things that people in the fantasy baseball community want to see in a young pitcher, and they're going to push him very aggressively.
Yeah, it could be true. The one thing that we don't know yet that makes what you're doing pretty tough, actually, is will there be a DH in the National League?
That would also be a pretty big factor, right? Hurt Snell.
I would say 75-25 there will be.
Yeah, I'd
maybe higher.
I'd probably even go a little higher, but I think we're splitting hairs at this point. I'm expecting it to happen.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm expecting baseball in 2022. I'm expecting the CBA to be an ugly negotiation, but one that does get rectified because, yes, 2020 still happened.
14 teams in the playoffs, baby.
It's something. Yeah, it's going to be some concessions that we can't even fully grasp right now, but it's going to happen.
14, I think, is too much, dude. I watch basketball, and it seems like half the teams make the playoffs. 14 is like almost half, and then the basketball playoffs take forever, and the first round matchups a lot of times are not compelling.
I think it'd be better in a sport like basketball and hockey, and maybe baseball is already sort of closer to this, but instead of 16 teams getting into the postseason, if 10 or 12 got in, and those last 2 to 4 teams that got in had to play a quick series. I actually think baseball's wild card approach has been something that at first, a lot of us, at least I was on the side that was like, oh, this isn't good. This is not the tradition. It's like, screw tradition. In baseball, a lot of times the tradition needs to be questioned.
I suppose it could further cement like it could give a better advantage to division winners, right?
Yes, you should let teams that
all
do
get a
better in the
bye.
regular season rest a little bit and get healthy and get right. Like that's worth something.
And not have to face someone in the first round.
Right. I think that's a good way to do it. But obviously revenue and getting as many teams as possible.
Because you still want to put some pressure on teams to want to be good. Because you don't want everyone to be like, hey, we all have a first round matchup. I just need to be better than 16 teams.
Yeah, we're getting a couple home playoff games. So, yay, we did it.
Yeah, we did it. Yeah, we did it. We just have to win 84 games. Oh, we don't want that.
No, we really don't. We are going to go because, as I mentioned up top, this camping chair, it's a good camping chair, but it's not a great broadcasting chair. But if you'd like to support the show and more broadly the site, you can do that by going to theathletic.com/rates and barrels. $3.99 a month gets you in the door to start. Thank you to the many of you who have done that already. And if you'd like to find us on Twitter, he's at Enoceris. I am at Derek Van Riper. As always, you can drop us an email, ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com. If you're enjoying this podcast, take a moment to leave us a nice rating and review. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to get all of the new episodes as they become available. That is going to wrap things up for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.